What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. You're watching part 2 of how to survive a nuclear war. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about how a nuclear war would actually play out and what to expect from a nuclear war. But before I get into that, I highly recommend you guys watch part 1 if you haven't seen part 1 yet. Part 1 is very long. It's an hour and 40 minutes long, but it's packed with information. And if you don't know anything about nuclear war, you should go and watch part 1 before you watch this video, because a lot of what I talk about in this video is kind of more intermediate level in terms of knowledge of nuclear war, and it builds off of what I discussed in part 1. So if you have no clue about nuclear war and you're a beginner to this topic, you should go and watch part 1 first before you watch this video, because you're not going to get much out of this video unless you watch part 1. Okay, so I'm going to leave a link up above at the top of this video, and you guys can click on that link and it'll send you to part 1. Alright guys, so without further delay, let's talk about how a nuclear war would actually play out. So there's 2 types of nuclear strikes that you need to understand, and that's a preemptive strike and a retaliatory strike. Alright guys, so we have preemptive strikes and retaliatory strikes. Now, a preemptive strike is when one side strikes another side without warning for either self-defense purposes or for conquest, okay? So a preemptive strike is basically like punching somebody in the face if you know that they have a gun on them. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to knock that guy out before he can draw his gun and shoot you with it, okay? So that's what a preemptive strike is, more or less. Or you're trying to get the jump on your enemy and attack your enemy first before they can attack you. That's a preemptive strike, okay? A good example of a preemptive strike is the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound, okay? That was a preemptive strike by the United States. The United States raided Osama bin Laden's compound because they wanted to eliminate the terrorists before the terrorists could strike us again. Okay, that was a preemptive strike. So that's one type of nuclear attack. And a preemptive strike is not just for self-defense purposes. It can also be for conquest. So the examples that I just gave you guys were more of like a self-defense motivation for striking preemptively, like punching somebody that you know has a gun or a knife and you want to knock them out before they shoot you. That's more on a self-defense motivation, but there are countries that do preemptive strikes for conquest purposes. Okay, conquest meaning they want to take over another country, they want to expand their territory, they want to expand their sphere of influence. And countries like that will attack preemptively, okay? So there's 2 motivations for that. Like I said, self-defense or conquest, okay? Those are the 2 main motivations for a preemptive strike. Now, the second type of nuclear attack is a retaliatory strike, okay? A retaliatory strike is an example of Russia threatening to hit us with nukes if we were to attack Crimea and try to get Crimea back into Ukraine. That's a retaliatory strike. A retaliatory strike is a type of strike where you're already hit by something and you're retaliating, okay? It's kind of like if somebody punches you in the face, you know, you didn't want to get into the fight, okay? You're trying to avoid a fight with this person, but you have some drunk, belligerent guy, and he keeps bothering you, and he's bothering your wife or your girlfriend, and, you know, he starts pushing you, and then he punches you out of nowhere, okay? You didn't want to get into that fight, but because he punched you and he starts attacking you, you have to fight back, okay? And that's a retaliatory strike. And this is what we've almost experienced recently in Ukraine was a retaliatory strike, okay? And in this situation, most recently, Russia would have retaliated if the United States tried to take back Crimea or eastern Ukraine by force, okay? That would have been a retaliatory strike. Okay, so those are the two main types of nuclear strikes or nuclear attacks that we need to be concerned with. All right, guys, so keeping in mind the two different types of strikes, preemptive and retaliatory, we're now going to get deeper into how a nuclear war would play out, okay? So if you watched part 1, you'll remember that I talked about the nuclear triad, okay? And the nuclear triad has three legs: land, sea, and air, okay? A nuclear triad is a philosophy of nuclear warfare where you don't have all of your nuclear weapons based in one particular area. You have them spread out, okay? You have them spread out between land-based systems, sea-based systems, and air-based systems, okay? This way, if the enemy tries to neutralize one of your, let's say, land-based systems, you still have sea and air-based systems that can fight back, okay? So that's what a nuclear triad is. So remember the nuclear triad. If you don't know what that is, go back and watch part 1. I'm not going to discuss it here anymore. But within the nuclear triad, you have to understand that there's strategic and tactical missiles. Okay, so those are the two types of missiles that we need to be concerned with, are strategic and tactical, okay? And for a nuclear war scenario for the United States, we're really only concerned with strategic weapons. We're not really concerned with tactical weapons because tactical weapons are short range, okay? Tactical weapons are what's known as SRBMs, or short range ballistic missiles. These would be like your Iskander missiles, and strategic nuclear weapons would be your ICBMs and your SLBMs, your Minuteman missiles, your Trident missiles, okay? And if you don't know what any of this is, go back and watch part 1. That's why I was telling you guys to watch part 1. So we have strategic and tactical missiles. Tactical missiles are, again, short range, and they're very low yield, and they're designed to strike specific targets on the battlefield. And strategic targets or strategic missiles are designed to attack strategic targets, meaning a strategic weapon would be used for a preemptive strike, okay? Typically, that's the type of weapons that you would use for a preemptive strike, are strategic weapons. And tactical weapons would mostly be a concern if you live in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. You would want to be concerned about tactical weapons because Russia has deployed a lot of Iskander missiles on the border of Eastern Europe, and they would likely use tactical nuclear missiles to wipe out specific targets inside of Eastern Europe. Okay, so now that we discussed strategic and tactical missiles, we need to understand the nuclear triad and how the nuclear triad fits into war, okay? So in a war, the land-based systems are the primary weapons that are used in a nuclear war, okay? The sea and air-based systems are basically backups to the land-based systems. The land-based systems are the primary weapons in a nuclear war, okay? So those are your nuclear silos, and silos are just holes in the ground where missiles are stored, and they're underground bases that have, let's say, thousands of missiles underground, and they launch these missiles from underground, okay? So those are land-based systems, and both the United States and Russia have most of their nuclear weapons inside of land-based systems, okay? Sea-based and air-based systems are not primary strategic nuclear deployment systems, okay? The reason why is that sea-based and air-based systems, they have limitations on the size of the weapons that they can carry and how many weapons they can carry. Sea-based and air-based systems are much more expensive to build up versus land-based systems are very easy to build up because you're not constrained by payload capacities and different things that you have to worry about when you're delivering bombs from a stealth bomber or out of a submarine. Okay, so land-based systems are much easier to stockpile and build up, and that's why Russia and the United States have most of their nuclear arsenal allocated in land-based systems. Okay, so in a nuclear war scenario, Russia and the United States would first use their land-based systems, and those would be the primary not delivery systems, but those would be the primary deployment systems, okay? Most of the nuclear weapons would be deployed out of land-based systems in a nuclear war, okay? The sea-based and air-based systems would be used as a backup, okay? And if you didn't watch part one, you should go and do that now because you're not going to understand what I'm talking about. But, you know, you have the Ohio-class subs in the ocean, and you have the stealth bombers in the air, and those act as a backup to our land-based systems should something happen to our land-based systems. Okay, so that's a very important concept to understand, is that in a nuclear war, the primary delivery systems are going to be land-based. They're going to come out of silos, okay? We have thousands of silos in North Dakota, in Montana, and Wyoming, and Russia has thousands of silos underground in the vast Siberian forests, okay? So in a nuclear war, we would launch nukes out of those silos in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming towards Russia, and Russia would launch nukes at us from the silos that are inside of the vast Siberian wilderness. So in a nuclear war, keeping in mind that the land-based systems are the primary ways that Russia and the U.S. would deploy their missiles at each other, the land-based systems are the main target in a nuclear war, okay? One side is going to try to neutralize the other side's nuclear arsenal, okay? And specifically, they're going to go after the land-based systems first because those are the easiest to target because Russia and the U.S. have satellites and recon planes, and we know where a lot of our enemies' silos are located, okay? And so we already know where a lot of Russia's silos are located, and they know where our silos are located. So in a nuclear war, they would immediately launch thousands or hundreds of nukes and try to take out all of our silos before we can strike back, okay? That's the name of the game, and that's how you win a nuclear war, okay? In order to win a nuclear war, you have to hit the other guy first before he can hit you, okay? So what they would do is, like I said, they already know where our silos are. They know that we have silos in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. It's pretty much public knowledge. And with all the satellites that they have, they can zoom in and they can see where the silos are located. They can see the bay doors that open up and the missiles come out of. And they can target those bay doors. And they don't need to hit those bay doors with a huge nuclear bomb. It could be a very small, low-yield bomb. But the goal is to destroy those silos. And there's hundreds of silos scattered in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. And they're scattered throughout the countryside. And so they would target each one of those silos to wipe those silos out. So this way we can't shoot back at them, okay? So that's the name of the game, okay? The name of the game is for us to, or for them to hit our land-based systems first before we can retaliate. Now, they would also try to go after our sea and air-based systems as well, but those are going to be harder to target, okay? So that's why they would go after the land-based systems first, because the sea and air-based systems are hard to destroy because you have submarines that are underwater, and the Russians are not going to be able to shoot submarines that are thousands of feet underwater in the ocean. And if you have stealth bombers in the air, they're not going to know where the stealth bombers are. So they're not going to really worry too much about subs and stealth bombers. They're going to worry about our silos, and they're going to go after our silos in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wyoming. And I'm going to give you guys a specific list of targets later on in the video, so don't worry about that now. Okay, I'm going to list out specific targets, but they'll also go for sea and air-based systems, and specifically they're going to go for any kind of bases that support the sea and air-based systems. So if, let's say, you have an Air Force base that B-2 bombers use to land and take off from, or that are used for maintenance purposes, they're going to try to destroy those bases. If there's any kind of bases where Ohio-class subs are stored and maintained, and where Trident missiles are stored, they're going to try to hit those areas, okay? But their primary target is going to be the land-based systems, because this is where most of our nuclear weapons are deployed, is in the land-based systems, okay? The sea and the air-based systems are secondary, all right? Same thing with Russia, okay? Most of their nuclear arsenal is in the land-based systems, so this is the primary target here, okay? And contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that in a nuclear war, the big cities are going to get hit, okay? And to a certain degree, that's always a possibility, but it's less likely, okay? And the reason why is that while hitting a city is a tempting target, you know, like New York City or Washington, D.C., it's a very tempting target for Russia or any other superpower to just blow up, you know, New York City or blow up Washington, D.C. That would really send a statement for sure, and it would cripple our economy, and it would cause all kinds of problems. But it's very tempting, but it's not realistic, okay? Because you have to understand that in a nuclear war, the enemy is going to have a limited window to strike, okay? And if they use their weapons to hit civilian targets, like cities, for instance, it's not going to really cripple our nuclear arsenal or our military, okay? Our nuclear arsenal and our military is going to survive, and then we're going to get so mad, we're going to launch double the amount of nukes back at them and obliterate them, okay? So they're not going to go after our cities and our civilian areas, okay? At least not in the first strike, okay? The first strike is going to be targeting our nuclear arsenal. They want to take out our nuclear arsenal before we can shoot back at them, okay? If that makes sense, all right? So if you live in a city or close to a city, you don't really have to worry a whole lot if there's no nuclear arsenal areas near you, okay? Nuclear missile bases and things like that, and I'll get into that later in the video, but they're not going to go after civilian targets because, again, if they hit one of our cities, it's not going to damage our nuclear arsenal. It's not going to damage our military. And then all we're going to do is just retaliate back at them and just obliterate them, okay? And we're going to be so mad about that they killed millions of our own, that we're going to send all of our nukes and just totally level Russia, okay? So they're never going to do that, at least not in the first strike. The first strike is a very surgical strike, and all of the missiles that they would launch at us would be targeting specific military targets. So they would target our land-based systems first, and then our sea and air-based systems also. And the whole point of doing that is so this way we can't retaliate back at them. Okay, that's the whole purpose of doing that. The goal is to neutralize our nuclear arsenal so we can't fight back, okay? That's the whole purpose of it, all right? They're not going to go after cities because it's not going to do them any good. Now, if there's follow-up strikes, let's say they hit us with a first strike, and their first strike is successful at wiping out our land-based systems, or most of our land-based systems, and some of our sea and air-based systems, they could potentially send another volley of missiles towards civilian targets, okay? That's always a possibility, but typically the first strike is going to be aimed at the land-based nuclear silos, the sea and air-based components of our nuclear triad, and once they take out our land-based silos and some of our sea and air-based components, then they could potentially go for another volley of missiles, a second strike, and the second strike would be targeting infrastructure. If they wanted to do a second strike, they may not necessarily want to do that, okay? The first strike alone is going to cripple our entire nuclear arsenal if it's successful, and it's going to send us back to 1900 where we had no nukes at all, and it's going to totally eliminate our nuclear arsenal. And if they hit military targets too, it's going to cripple our military and it's going to leave us defenseless, and we're not going to be a superpower anymore. Okay, so that's the big goal for them, and the objective is to wipe out our nuclear arsenal and neutralize our military. That's the main goal, okay? If they can pull that off, they've done a lot by doing that, okay? And they don't need to go any further. But if they want to go further and they really want to screw us over, they can start hitting our infrastructure, which would be the second volley of missiles, would go after power plants, dams, any kind of power generation facilities, airports, bridges, things like that. Okay, they would go after our critical infrastructure, data centers, power lines, okay, things like that. That would be the second strike. And then if they really want to screw us even more, then in the third strike, they could go after economic centers like New York City or DC. They could try to hit our big cities and wipe out our big cities. But that would be like a total worst case scenario. And I don't think that Russia would go to that extent unless we hit Moscow with a nuclear weapon or something like that. Okay, if we, let's say, dropped a bomb on Moscow like we did on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then I think they would, hit us hard with, everything they got. But if it was just like a situation over Ukraine where, let's say, we got involved in Ukraine and something escalated over there, I think they would try to just go after our nuclear arsenal and they would forget about civilians. So that's a very critical concept. So once again, they would primarily target our land-based systems, our land-based nuclear weapons. They would also go after our sea and air-based nuclear weapons. In addition to that, they would go after any kind of command and control that's associated with our nuclear triad. And they would also go after military bases that are really important. Okay, like Norfolk Naval Base, for instance, is a huge Navy base, and that's a classic example. They would also go after continuity of government sites like, bunkers, relocation bunkers. For example, Mount Weather is a presidential relocation bunker. They could potentially target that, all right? But their primary goal is to neutralize our nuclear arsenal, and they want to take out our guns before we can use our guns on them, okay? Now, going back to a concept that I discussed in the first video about different types of nuclear weapons, you have Mervs and standard nuclear weapons. Okay, Mervs are multiple independent reentry vehicles. They would not use like one giant bomb to target specific areas. They would use what are known as Mervs, which are multiple small warheads that can target specific areas and strike targets in a strategic and surgical manner, okay? They're not going to put, a 50 megaton bomb on one missile and drop it on New York City. It's just not going to happen, okay? It's not going to do much good for them to do that, because then we would just bomb them back even worse, okay? So they're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to go after our nuclear silos with Mervs, and they're going to target specific targets, okay? Now, specifically, how would the war play out? So in this situation, let's say that Russia wants to launch a preemptive strike against us, which I think is a highly likely scenario, okay? There could be different reasons for that. It could be because they feel that the United States is getting too powerful and they want to weaken us, and they want to reduce our status as a superpower. And the only way to reduce our status of being a superpower is to hit us with a nuclear strike and wipe out our nuclear arsenal. So this way we have no nuclear deterrent, and that would basically strip us of our superpower status and our nuclear power status. It would damage us economically, and also if they went after our military and they struck some very critical military bases, that would also send us back many, many decades and reduce our status of being the world's superpower, okay? So in our situation, let's say Russia strikes us first because they want to knock us down a peg. They want to reduce our status as a superpower. It could also be, let's say, if we get involved in Ukraine again and Ukraine joins NATO, and Russia tries to take over Ukraine before Ukraine joins NATO, and we get involved and we start shooting at Russian troops, and we start sending tanks into Ukraine, and our tanks are engaging with Russian tanks, and the situation escalates to the point where we're at war with Russia. If the war starts to escalate and a lot of Russians start to die, it's very likely that Russia would use a nuclear weapon or multiple nuclear weapons against us, okay? And Vladimir Putin has even said that he would do that, okay? If we got involved in Ukraine and we tried to protect Ukraine, he would hit us with nukes, okay? So in that situation, obviously anything is possible, but they're most likely going to go after our land-based nuclear weapons first, and then they're going to go after our sea and air-based weapons, and then they're going to go after command and control sites like NORAD, and then they're going to go after continuity of government sites, and then they're going to hit important military bases like I discussed, okay? So let's say in our scenario, we'll use the Ukraine situation. Let's say 2 months from now, Ukraine joins NATO and Russia doesn't like it, so Russia invades eastern Ukraine and tries to take half of Ukraine or all of Ukraine, and then in return NATO deploys and tries to fight the Russians back to protect Ukraine, and NATO and Russia start to fight each other. At that point, Russia decides to preemptively strike NATO and America, okay? They hit us with nukes first, and because they want to stop the war. And so the way that would work is that Russia would first use their silos deep underground in the vast Siberian forests, because we don't know where a lot of Russia's silos are, because in the first video I talked about how the Russian terrain is heavily forested, and the Siberian taiga is extremely dense, and it's hard for spy satellites to penetrate that dense forest cover. So we don't know where a lot of Russia's silos are. So it would be hard for us to target those silos. But nonetheless, what they're going to do is they're going to launch their missiles from the silos in the vast Siberian taiga, and they're going to launch the missiles out of those silos. They would not use their submarines or their airborne bombers or their transporter erector launchers yet. They're going to save those for any kind of secondary or tertiary strikes in case we wipe out their silos. So they would not use their subs or their air bombers or TELs in the first strike. The first strike would all come from ground-based nukes, ICBMs, okay? So now one important thing to understand is that the United States and Russia are constantly updating nuclear targets around the clock. They have thousands and thousands of people that are constantly looking at satellite photos and gathering data from reconnaissance planes. And these are called geospatial intelligence analysts. And what they do is they look at satellite data and data from spy planes and reconnaissance planes, and they try to figure out what the other side is doing, where their nukes are, where their silos are. And Russia and the United States already has specific targets, okay? And so if something were to happen, all Vladimir Putin has to do is pick up the phone and say, okay, order strike number 1, you know, and they may have like 500 different types of nuclear strikes that are designed to target different areas of the country, okay, here in the U.S. And we have the same thing, okay? The United States has the same thing for pretty much every country. Iran, China, Russia, North Korea. We have multiple nuclear strike options, okay? And those options are constantly being updated by a huge team of analysts that have a daily job of poring over data from satellites and recon planes, and they're constantly updating those options and updating those plans, okay? They're called nuclear strike options, okay? And the president of the United States, he has what's called the nuclear football, okay, where he can order nuclear strikes from a laptop in a duffel bag or in a briefcase that somebody carries around everywhere with the president, okay? So the president can take the nuclear football, which has a special laptop that's hardened and designed to withstand an EMP blast and things like that, and he can order any type of nuclear strike he wants. And we already have everything mapped out. All he has to do is just say, I want to strike, I want option 23, okay? And option 23 may have, let's say, you know, strike Moscow and St. Petersburg, you know, and then strike number 24 may target something else, okay? But the bottom line is that America and Russia, we already have the targets mapped out, and we already have the strike options and the plans, okay? So all Putin or Biden have to do is just pick up the phone and say what type of strike they want to do, and the missiles go right away, okay? So that's an important thing to understand. And another important thing to understand too is that there's a high likelihood that in a nuclear war, we would probably be hit with an EMP first before the missiles start to come, okay? And the reason why is that the EMP would be used to wipe out the GPS and radars of the enemy, okay? So if Russia wants to hit us with a bunch of nukes, they're going to try to take out our satellites, and they're going to try to take out our GPS, and they're going to try to take out our radars and our military communications arrays, okay? Because in order for our military to function, our military has to be able to communicate. The military has, you know, all kinds of radio antennas and GPS and radars and everything like that. So the military has to communicate with each other, okay, in order for them to survive a nuclear war and to retaliate against a nuclear strike. So by hitting us with an EMP first, it would eliminate a lot of the comms that the military uses for retaliatory purposes, okay? So it would be like a jab, okay? If you're thinking about, you know, a boxing match, all right, the EMP would be like the jab that the boxer is throwing to soften up his opponent, before he comes in with the cross or a hook, okay, which is the power punch, okay? So the EMP would soften us up, and then right after the EMP, they would launch hundreds of nukes targeting our silos in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, and other targets as well. All right, so another thing to keep in mind is that the average travel time for an ICBM is about 30 minutes. So if Russia launches a nuke from Siberia, it's going to take 30 minutes for that nuke to get here to the United States. So assuming that we don't get hit by an EMP first and we still have our emergency alert system, you would get a notification on your cell phone or on your TV or pretty much anywhere that the government can get the information out. If there's a missile inbound, and the U.S. NORAD is North American Aerospace Defense. They have huge radars and satellites that they can use to detect any kind of enemy missile launches. As soon as they detect that Russia launched a missile, they're going to send out warnings through the emergency alert system. And again, assuming that we don't get hit by an EMP first, you would get an alert on your phone, okay? Kind of like those alerts that you get when there's a child abduction emergency. You get this thing on your phone that says that there was a child abduction emergency, and then they give you a license plate and a description of the vehicle. It would pretty much be the same thing as that. And it would say, missile inbound. This is the emergency alert. We have a missile detected heading towards New York City, or, I'm just using New York City as an example. I'm not saying that that's a target. I don't want to contradict myself here, but let's say we have a nuclear missile inbound for Montana. It's expected to arrive at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the Great Falls area. Evacuate immediately. Okay, it would be very similar to like a tornado warning. When any of you guys that live in a tornado-prone area where you get tornadoes or severe storms, you get an alert on your phone that there's a tornado coming and you should take shelter immediately. It would pretty much say the same thing. It would say that there's a nuclear bomb coming, and if you're in, let's say Great Falls, Montana, you have to take shelter immediately because there's multiple missiles inbound and they're going to arrive in 30 minutes. Okay, so you're going to have only 30 minutes to take shelter to protect yourself from the overpressure from the actual bomb exploding, the thermal radiation, the prompt radiation, and the residual radiation, which is the fallout. Okay, so there's a lot of things you have to shelter from, and I'm going to talk about that in future videos in the series. All right, but you have about 30 minutes before the ICBMs come. And if we're talking about sea or air-based systems like bomber planes or SLBMs, submarine launched ballistic missiles, if let's say Russia has a sub that's in the Atlantic Ocean, it would obviously take a lot faster for that missile to hit us, because rather than being in Siberia, the missiles are in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Long Island or off the coast of Virginia. And so the missile only has to travel a few hundred miles to hit its target. So in that case, you would maybe only have 10 or 15 minutes to take shelter. Okay, so that's something to consider. So now I want to show you guys some of the main targets for a nuclear war with Russia. All right, guys, so here are some of the main targets that Russia would try to hit in a nuclear war. And these are the primary targets that they're going to try to wipe out first. Okay, these are the primary targets, the first major targets. These are the most important targets for Russia that they have to eliminate. Okay, so the first one is Minot Air Force Base in Minot, North Dakota. And Minot Air Force Base is where we have a huge amount of Minuteman ICBMs. This is a critical base for our land-based ICBMs, our Minuteman ICBMs. 30% of our ICBMs are located here in Minot. The next target would be Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana. And when I say these Air Force bases, you have to understand that the nuclear silos are not just confined to the actual base, but they're spread out, thousands of acres outside of the actual base. Okay, so if you're anywhere near, within a few mile radius of these bases here, you're potentially going to get direct hits from nuclear missiles. Okay, and so if you live in Minot, North Dakota, you could potentially get hit directly with nuclear warheads. If you live in Great Falls, Montana, you could potentially get hit with nuclear warheads. Okay, Malmstrom is another base that we have a lot of our Minuteman ICBMs. And then here we have Warren Air Force Base in southeastern Wyoming. Okay, so these three bases here, Minot, Malmstrom, and Warren, is where all of our nuclear silos are located, in these three areas of the country. Okay, all of our land-based ICBMs, our Minuteman ICBMs, are located in these three bases. So the Russians would try to obliterate these bases and take them out. This would be their first priority, okay, to get rid of these. So if you live in one of these areas, in Minot, in Great Falls, or if you live in southeastern Wyoming, you really need to consider either relocating and getting out and living somewhere else, or having a really good plan, okay? Because you're not going to have much time to react once the missiles are inbound. So you need to have a good plan, and you need to have a good shelter, okay? Once they take out these three bases, they're going to also go after NORAD, which is North American Aerospace Defense. And NORAD is based out of Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. And NORAD is absolutely essential for our nuclear arsenal, okay? NORAD is basically the brain of our nuclear triad, okay? Every single radar and every single satellite gets fed into NORAD, okay? NORAD is the central nervous system of our nuclear arsenal, okay? NORAD is where we have all the data coming in from radars and satellites, okay? And we have people in NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain, which is a hardened bunker. We have people in NORAD that constantly look at radars in Canada and different areas around the country, sensing where the missiles are coming from. So NORAD is another big target, okay? And also Peterson Air Force Base, this whole area. Colorado Springs is a bad area to live, just because you have a huge nuclear target right next door, okay? And NORAD and Peterson would get hit with multiple nuclear bombs, okay? Because they would want to take out NORAD and take out Peterson, okay? So this is a no-go zone to live. So after they take out our land-based missiles in Minot, Malmstrom, and Warren, and after they take out our NORAD, they're going to go after our sea-based nuclear missiles, okay, our sea-based ICBMs, and those are located in Kings Bay, Georgia, and Bangor, Washington, okay. In Kings Bay, Georgia, we have an Ohio-class sub base there, and that's where the Ohio-class subs are based out of Kings Bay, Georgia, and the Ohio-class subs are responsible for launching nuclear weapons. That's their main job, okay? And if you go back and watch part 1, I talk about them a little bit more. But what you need to know is that Kings Bay, Georgia is a critical base for our Ohio-class subs, and all of our submarine-launched ballistic missiles, the Trident missiles, are on Ohio-class subs, and Kings Bay, Georgia is the main base for the Ohio-class subs. Okay, so they would try to go after the Kings Bay, Georgia base and take it out. They would also go after the Bangor, Washington base, which is located in the Puget Sound near Seattle. And the Bangor, Washington base is also an Ohio-class sub base. Okay, so we have two bases. The Kings Bay, Georgia base is for Atlantic. It's like our Atlantic fleet. That's where the Ohio-class subs that are deployed on the Atlantic side are based out of Kings Bay. And our Ohio-class subs that are deployed on the Pacific side are deployed out of Bangor, okay? So we have Ohio-class subs at both of these bases, and specifically in Bangor, Washington, you have a storage site for the Trident missiles, okay? Trident missiles are the submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are launched out of the Ohio-class subs, okay? The Trident missiles are basically a sea-based version of the Minuteman ICBMs that are launched out of Minot or Malmstrom or Warren, okay? They're basically 90% the same thing as the Minuteman missiles. They're just a little bit smaller, and they're designed to be launched out of submarines from underwater, okay? So they're designed a little bit differently, but they have a very long range. They can reach any target in the world that they want. They pretty much have the same capabilities as the Minuteman missile does, okay? And so Bangor, Washington is a huge storage area for the Trident missiles. We have possibly hundreds, if not thousands, of Trident missiles in Bangor, Washington, okay? Kings Bay, Georgia has a lot of the Ohio-class subs, okay? But Bangor, Washington is one of the main areas in the country for Trident missile storage. So they're going to try to hit these areas as well, all right? And after they do that, they're also going to go after any kind of Air Force base where we would be launching our B-2 stealth bombers from. And one of the big ones is Whiteman Air Force Base, which is in Missouri. That's another huge target for a nuclear attack, is Whiteman Air Force Base. That's where we have a lot of our B-2 bombers. And then you have Air Force Global Strike Command, okay? Air Force Global Strike, which is located in Louisiana, okay? And you could look up all these places to get specific about where they are. So this is another big target here is Whiteman. Whiteman is a big target, and Air Force Global Strike, because Air Force Global Strike is the Air Force's component of the Nuclear Triad, okay? So Air Force Global Strike Command in Louisiana is responsible for commanding the B-2 bombers and any kind of Air Force assets during a nuclear war, okay? This is where the Air Force would command all of our B-2 bombers and B-1 Lancers and B-52 Stratofortresses. This is where they would be commanding those planes from, okay? So they would try to take out Whiteman. They would try to take out Air Force Global Strike Command. These are the main targets, okay? So if you live near any of these areas, you need to make sure you have a good plan, or you need to consider relocating, okay? I'm also going to give you guys some other targets. Besides these, there's a lot of other targets that would be hit, okay? But these are the main targets, okay? These are the primary targets that Russia would go after in a nuclear war, okay? So if you live near these places, you need to have a really good plan or move out. So I'm going to show you guys some other targets that are also high on the list for Russia. All right, guys, so here's some other types of targets that are high on the list for Russia. And I'm not going to list out all the targets because I could sit here all day. There's hundreds of different targets. But what I did was I listed out some general categories, and you guys can go and research them on your own, and I'll give you guys some examples of each category, some targets for each category. So you have Cog Sites. Cog Sites means continuity of government, and these are basically bunkers for the president and for VIPs. Okay, so an example of a Cog Site that's a very high on the list in terms of a primary target for Russia would be Mount Weather. Okay, Mount Weather is a high on the list. Okay, Mount Weather is a presidential bunker in Virginia. It's about an hour away from DC. So this is an example of a Cog Site that would be hit with nukes during a nuclear war. Okay, so any kind of continuity of government site, any kind of bunker. Another one is Raven Rock. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of Raven Rock. Even Camp David would be hit. Okay, any kind of bunker that the president would use during a nuclear war or any kind of continuity of government site would be hit with nukes. Okay. The next one is going to be labs, okay? And when I say labs, I'm talking about nuclear research labs. So an example of that would be, let's say, Lawrence Livermore, which is in California. Lawrence Livermore, they do nuclear research there, okay? Another one is, a big one is Idaho Falls. Idaho Falls is another one. Okay, Idaho Falls is another big nuclear research lab. And the reason why they're hitting the nuclear research labs is they want to eliminate our ability to enrich uranium and make more weapons and design weapons. If it's a long-term war, okay, they want to neutralize that capability. So Idaho Falls, Lawrence Livermore, Brookhaven on Long Island, Brookhaven Lab. There's a lot of them. Los Alamos is another one. Another one too is the Pantex plant in Texas. The Pantex plant is the only place in the United States where nuclear weapons are assembled. Okay, so the Pantex plant is a big target in Texas, and the Pantex plant is where they take all the different components of a nuclear weapon or a nuclear ICBM, and they assemble them into a final weapon at the Pantex plant. So the Pantex plant is a big target. Idaho Falls, Los Alamos, Brookhaven, Lawrence Livermore, and there's a lot of other ones. Command and control we already talked about, which was NORAD, okay? But some other ones would be Offutt Air Force Base. And I know a lot of guys out there say that I say that word the wrong way. It's not Offutt, but that's just the way I say it. So you're going to have to deal with it. Okay, so Offutt Air Force Base, which is in Nebraska. This is home of Strategic Command. Strategic Command is the most important branch of the U.S. military. The Strategic Command is basically like the brain of the military. That's where the U.S. military has an underground bunker complex. And after 9/11, Dick Cheney was sent to Offutt Air Force Base in their bunker. But Offutt Air Force Base is a critical command and control site for controlling the entire U.S. military. The vice president or the president or any kind of any person that's in succession. So it could be the Speaker of the House. If, let's say, something happened to the president and the vice president, the next person in line would be the Speaker of the House, I believe, or the Defense Secretary. They can command the entire U.S. military from Offutt Air Force Base. Okay, this is the brain of the military, home of Strategic Command or STRATCOM. Okay, that's another area they could go after. Any kind of bases that are related to radars and satellites and things like that. They're also going to be targeted because they want to eliminate our radars. And then finally, we have critical bases, which an example of that would be like Norfolk Naval Base, okay? Norfolk is a big target. That's the biggest naval base in the country. That's where we have all of our aircraft carriers, or most of our aircraft carriers are in Norfolk. So that's a big, big, big target. Another one could be Quantico. Quantico would be another big target. Okay, that's the Marines. Another one might be Fort Bragg, which is home of the Special Forces. Okay, they're going to go after these very important bases to try to get rid of them. Okay, so all of these targets here are high on the list for Russia. And these are just a small sampling. Okay, so you need to go and do your research. If you want to get more information on specific targets, I recommend you check out a book called Strategic Relocation by Joel Skousen. And he has a huge list of all the different nuclear targets in the country, okay? And if you guys want more information, you can email me, nyprepper85@gmail.com, and I can help you out in figuring out where your nearest target is in your area, okay? But these are just a small sampling. There's a lot more than this. I missed a lot, but these are some of the main targets here. So that's pretty much it for part 2. And I'll be releasing part 3 soon. So stay tuned to my channel for part 3, part 4, and then I'll do a part 5, possibly a part 6. We still have a lot to cover in this series. I'm going to I still didn't even get into the meat and potatoes of the series, where I'm going to talk about gear and fallout shelters and basic principles of radiation. I still have to get into that, okay? I haven't even scratched the surface of any of that stuff yet. But all these things are critical to understand before I get into, protecting yourself from radiation and potassium iodide, okay? You have to understand what the targets are. You have to understand what Russia is going to do. They're not going to go after cities. They're going to go after our land-based nuclear missiles. And, that's going to be their primary objective, is to wipe out our nuclear arsenal so we can't strike back. And they're also going to try to go after critical military bases and other important areas of the country that are vital to our military. And they're going to try to take out our military and our nuclear arsenal first, okay? They're not going to go after New York City. They're not going to drop a 50 megaton bomb on New York City. I've seen a lot of people, freaking out and sending me messages saying, oh my gosh, I live in New York City. What am I going to do? And my response is, well, you're not really a target. I know that, a lot of people in New York City, they think that New York is like the center of the world, and they have this mentality that New York is like the center of the world, and everybody's always thinking about New York, but they're really not. Okay, Russia is not thinking about New York. They don't care about New York City. They're more interested in our nuclear arsenal. Okay, so if you live in New York City or any big city in the U.S., you can breathe a sigh of relief, because you're not a primary target. You're possibly a secondary or tertiary target, okay? Or even a target of opportunity more than anything else. And a target of opportunity just means that they already took out all of our nuclear missiles. They took out our nuclear arsenal. They wiped out our military bases. And then if they want, they can hit our cities and they can hit our infrastructure and go after civilian targets and economic targets. And those would be targets of opportunity. They wouldn't be primary targets, okay? Their primary objective is to take out our nuclear arsenal so we can't strike back, and to cripple our military. And that's their main objective, because if they don't do that on the first strike, we're going to retaliate and obliterate them. Okay, so it's absolutely critical for them to be able to pull off this massive attack on their first try. Okay, think about the example that I used earlier with the gunman. Okay, if you see a guy walking into a store with a gun in his hand, you're going to have to take that guy out and use extreme force before he can pull the gun on you. So you have to hit him really hard, or you have to run and get up behind him and choke him out very quickly, because if you don't do it properly or you don't use extreme force, he's going to pull that gun out and shoot you. Okay, so that's the same thing here. Russia is going to hit us with a massive preemptive strike, and they're going to try to wipe out our military, wipe out our arsenal in one shot, and because they don't want to get wiped out themselves. Okay, so stay tuned for more videos, and that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless. And don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.